Europa Universalis 4 is a great game, but it can be a bit intimidating. My first time playing, I was shocked at the mere number of buttons, tabs, map modes, and other fiddly bits of the game. Playing for the first time with a group of friends, we decided our best bet would be to start somewhere isolated. I played as the Cherokee, and my friends played around me in North America. If you have played EU4, you know this was a terrible idea for a first run. Waiting for hundreds of years and not even knowing how to fabricate a claim, suffice it to say, that run did not last long. While I'm still not an expert, I haven't even done a world conquest for instance, I do have over 2,000 hours in the game, and I decided I wanted to put my thoughts out on the best starter nations in the game. By the end of this video, I will have covered 4 nations that I'd recommend to beginners. If you're a new player, I hope you find this video useful or entertaining, and I appreciate you giving it a chance. Do keep in mind that this video will not be going into detail about how to play as these 4 countries, but rather I'll be giving a general overview of why each one can be helpful for learning different mechanics. So first off, let's establish some context. For one, EU4 certainly is a complex game, even once you have played for 2,000 hours. Even so, while the game has a lot of different aspects, the main focus is obviously expansion through warfare. Other secondary focuses include diplomatic maneuvering and diplomatic expansion, internal development and country management, especially if you own the Common Sense DLC, trade, and colonialism, which is heavily linked to trade. There's a lot of overlap between these different aspects of the game, and any nation will have to deal with all of these to some extent, except possibly colonialism. For the purposes of this video, as we look at countries, we'll judge their worth as starter countries for a beginner based on these 5 categories: warfare, diplomacy, country management, trade, and colonialism. Obviously, with any nation in EU4, you can take them in any of these directions, but I'll be focusing on what a beginner is most likely going to do in the expected path. So which nations do I think are the best starting nations? Well, it depends on which of these aspects of the game you really want to learn most in one run. And if you're a beginner interested in learning the game, the best advice I can give is to just mess around with any nation that interests you. The first few campaigns for anyone will be sloppy, but it's more important to have fun as you learn. But let's get to the point in this video. Which are the best starter nations? At least in my opinion. Well, let's start with the game itself. On the nation select screen, the game recommends the Ottomans, Portugal, and Castile as good starter nations. Do I agree with this? Well, the answer is sort of. Specifically, 2 of these, in my opinion, are great, and the other, not so much. So let's go and get started. First, the Ottomans are, in my opinion, the best overall start. If we consider conquest to be the core gameplay loop of EU4, then the Ottomans are well suited for learning it. The Ottomans start with a position that allows for a variety of conquests right away, without having to worry too much about aggressive expansion as long as you expand in multiple directions. The Ottomans also provide plenty of practice in the realm of country management and trade. Dealing with various cultures and religions, and starting fairly large, the Ottomans require a bit of management to get running super smoothly, but also won't punish a player too much for not knowing all these mechanics in and out. Trade is due to their position in the Mediterranean, and their ability to expand into Arabia and beyond fairly easily. Again, while the Ottomans present many opportunities here, newer players won't be punished if they just sit with all their trade in Constantinople for the whole game. Diplomacy is a bit of a weaker point for the Ottomans. There's not too many areas that you should try to be diplomatic with rather than just conquering. As a quick hint, Tunis can be a good ally for most of the game, and you can sometimes ally France. Unfortunately, this means some players might have trouble with early game coalitions or larger enemies that require some help, such as Russia or particularly strong Austria. Colonialism is not necessarily out of the picture for the Ottomans, especially if you expand eastward to Indonesia and Australia, but the Ottomans are certainly not the best nation for introducing a new player to colonialism. That honor goes to our second choice of the 3 game recommended starter nations. Portugal. Portugal is a great choice for a starting nation, which is why it's slightly funny that my first run as them was only in the most recent patch, 4 years after I started playing the game. Portugal is in an interesting position. If you're a beginner, I recommend staying friends with Castile. Assuming Castile doesn't get destroyed by Aragon or France early on, they'll essentially keep you fairly safe for the whole game, or as long as you feel like keeping them as an ally. This can allow you to do conquest at your own pace in North Africa, slowly eating away at Morocco. Although beyond that, there's not too many viable conquests in Europe besides Castile, it does give you a way to ease into warfare, and also having to manage the land you conquer as you go. Even if you decide to backstab Castile eventually, this can give you practice in the diplomatic game, making alliances that will help once you betray them. However, the thing that Portugal is best for, by leagues, is colonialism and by extension trade. Portugal is a mission tree and events that greatly focus players towards colonialism, and colonialism is the best way to make money long term. Beyond this, having not too many threats in Europe makes it fairly easy to just focus on the colonial game if you want. The Seville trade node is one of the best in the game, and if you do end up moving into the Genoa trade node through conquest, even better. There's not much else to say about Portugal. If you think you want a more passive game with less pressure to constantly conquer like the Ottomans, Portugal can be good for you. At the same time, colonialism can be a lot for a new player to manage, so maybe hold off unless you really want to learn how to do a colonial and trade-focused game. So why not Castile? Now that we've finished both Portugal and the Ottomans, let me take a second to explain why out of the 3 game recommended choices, I don't think Castile is a great choice for beginners. Certainly Castile is not a terrible choice, but they face some issues in the early game that make them fairly unstable, including a civil war disaster brought about by having a terrible starting ruler, which itself is a challenge, and then having borders with both France and Aragon, who many times will band together to try to kill you. If you can make it to the Iberian wedding or get France to ally you, you'll be fine, but Castile has some issues that if handled poorly can weaken them and lead to some early game losses. Beyond Portugal and the Ottomans, I'm going to add 2 more suggestions for beginning players of my own. The first relates to an aspect of gameplay that the previous 2 lack in, the diplomatic game. For the diplomatic side of the game, Austria is my recommendation for a beginner. Austria starts in a strong position and will only get stronger if you handle them properly. Starting as the Holy Roman Emperor can help introduce you to the mechanics of the HRE if you're interested in learning them, and you're strong enough that unless you overextend, you shouldn't be the target of many offensive wars early on. Now here's where I'll throw a warning out. If you're new and don't have a firm grasp on how coalitions work, be very careful when expanding and do so slowly. Early targets for conquest should really just be, well, one target, Venice, who is not part of the empire and won't get you as much aggressive expansion. You can take some land from Bavaria or a couple other minors, but be very careful when doing so. The game that Austria is meant for is much more diplomatic by necessity, as any major expansions will get all of Central Europe pissed at you. Take it slow, try to marry Bohemia and Poland if you can to hope for a lucky personal union, and try to get the personal union over Hungary. Other than that, try to ally electors and make them happy with you to make sure you remain the emperor. Playing as Austria does not necessitate trying to unify the HRE, but that's certainly an option, and messing with those mechanics can be helpful in learning how diplomacy works. As far as trade and country management are concerned, both aspects are normally fairly easy to take care of and won't affect your country too much. Moving into Venice for trade can be good, but will normally not be a massive factor. And if you only take a few provinces at a time, your country should be fairly easy to manage. Colonialism is rarely going to be a huge factor as Austria, and even pushing for it strongly and explicitly will be somewhat difficult, especially as a beginner. And now we arrive at my final suggestion for a beginning nation, Muscovy. Muscovy starts in a position of decent power and with some easy early wars. Take out Novgorod and integrate your vassals and you'll already be the strongest power in the area. While Muscovy certainly has some challenges, including mid-game Poland, Denmark, and the Ottomans, Muscovy normally is pretty fairly equipped to grow without much resistance until that point in time. Muscovy is another conquest-focused nation, and if you really want to practice warfare, they're almost as good as the Ottomans for it, with there rarely being any issues early game with aggressive expansion or coalitions. Diplomatically, Muscovy starts you with a bunch of vassals and trains you how to deal with vassals, although after that it can falter a bit. As for other goals diplomatically, I recommend trying to marry people like Bohemia or Poland, as I recommended for Austria, to try to fish for possible personal unions. Being so large, Muscovy certainly gives opportunities to manage your country, having to deal with different Tatar cultures and different other religions that you'll be conquering along the way. In terms of trade, Muscovy has some flexibility in how you want to use or mess with trade. But if you prefer not to even think about trade, you can normally get by just fine as Muscovy without changing anything there. And the last aspect, colonialism, is where Muscovy is fairly interesting. If you form Russia, and especially if you have the Third Rome expansion pack, you can easily push eastward, colonizing Siberia until you reach East Asia, where you can stop or choose to go to Alaska and California. The best thing about Russia's colonial capabilities is that most of the stuff you colonize will be part of your land empire, so there's not much need to have to worry about shipping troops over to defend your colonial lands. It all integrates fairly well with the conquest you'll already be doing. So there we have the suggestions I'd give you for the best starting nations in the game. Obviously they're pretty Eurocentric, but a lot of the game's core mechanics such as institutions and colonialism are focused around European powers. Still, if you'd rather stick outside of Europe, here's some quick suggestions, although I won't be going into in-depth reasons for why. Tunis in North Africa, Mali in West Africa, Kilwa in East Africa, and Ayutthaya in Southeast Asia. All of those will have a bit more challenge being outside of Europe, but are all decently strong at the start of the game. Of course, as I mentioned at the start of the video, the best way to learn the game is to just pick up a country that seems interesting and run with it. This video is meant only to give you a sampler of the countries I think can help ease you most into the game if you really don't have any experience at all. Hopefully if you have watched the video till this point you found it useful or entertaining, and I hope you have fun playing EU4. It's almost certainly my favorite game of all time, so I'm very happy to be able to share it with others. Now that we've finished the content of the video, I'm going to go ahead and take a minute to go off the script here and just kind of talk to you guys. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. It's a bit different than normal content I do. If you're new to the channel, please leave a like and subscribe for more. I'm thinking about doing possible videos like this in the future, but a lot of that is going to be dependent on the feedback I get and how well it does on the channel. I already have a couple of videos planned like this, including one talking about the best regions in EU4, the most fun starting regions in EU4. Not meant for beginners, but just for people in general. Which regions of the game, of the world in EU4 do I think are the most fun areas to start? And videos like that will be done if this video does well. As far as other content I also do mostly Let's Plays, and I do a lot of streams that I put up on the channel of CK2 and Hearts of Iron 4, as well as a lot of EU4. I've also done a Beginner's Guide series for CK2 in the past, and I'm considering doing a Beginner's Guide series for EU4, a series of maybe 3 to 5 videos where I play a country like I normally would, but explaining every step of what I do. I've already done a couple polls about this and asked people for their thoughts, but I'd really like to know your feedback. Would this be something you'd find interesting or that you'd watch? Either way, thanks for all the feedback, and thanks for listening to the outro if you got this far, and I hope you guys enjoyed. I will see you guys later. Bye-bye.